Hello, my name is Lauren Graham, and this is my Home and School Connections video. So to start, some cultural influences on teaching and learning. So a teacher brings their cultural differences as well as a student, and it's very important to recognize those differences so that we can create an inclusive classroom. So some things that would be a cultural difference could be communication style, different values, religions, worldviews, classroom engagement. Some cultures don't necessarily value that. And achievements, some students feel more pressure, some students don't feel any. So it's important to recognize those things when teaching students that come from a different culture. And that brings us to cultural competence, and it's very, very important. Cultural competence is the educator's ability to respect and respond effectively to the cultural context of students. And for English learners specifically, this would include designing curriculum that may be more suitable for them, something that would include their culture, and also valuing and incorporating multilingualism. Sometimes their second language can be left behind and not valued at all, so it's important to value their second language and also use it as a tool to help them learn, because it's a part of their life and it should be treated that way. And culturally competent educators are also more likely to create a classroom that's inclusive for all students, so it's a very important thing to have. Which brings us to integrating English learners' cultural values and beliefs into the classroom, and it's very, very important. Using their values and their beliefs also helps affirm their identity. It can enhance their engagement. They feel more inclined to engage with the curriculum, and it bridges home and school experiences. Home and school in this time of their life can feel like two completely different places and worlds. So using parts of their culture to bridge that gap is great and very, very important. Teachers can integrate these values by incorporating texts, culturally relevant examples, and drawing on community traditions and artifacts to help teach that student and bridge that gap. So the role of culture in student learning. So culture impacts motivation, behavior, learning strategies. Some misunderstandings can arise, but when cultural behaviors are misinterpreted, it's very, very important. That brings us back to cultural competence, right? It's so, so important to understand where that student is coming from and not judge them for it, but to figure out what's the misunderstanding. And that can be a part of their learning, because sometimes they may feel left out or left behind. So again, teacher's job, bridge that gap and help them feel more included and to be more culturally responsive. And it helps also to manage classrooms and create more equity and instruct more effectively. Which brings us to addressing their social and emotional needs. So each EL student comes from a different background, and it may be hard for them to integrate and interact with their peers depending on the circumstance. So things like, it's important to have strategies like integrating culturally relevant and social emotional learning, create mentorship or buddy programs, provide safe spaces for English learners to express themselves and things like that. Like if a student comes from a culture where dance is very important, maybe incorporate dancing into the classroom so that they can feel included, as well as having the whole class participate in something that they would like, right? So always thinking about strategies to support them socially is very, very important in this time of their life. Which also brings us to supporting and celebrating the cultural diversity. Sometimes kids, especially, a different culture can be a little overwhelming or scary. So it's important to bridge the gap. So using culturally responsive teaching, dual language books, integrating global perspectives into the curriculum, and creating cross-cultural group projects and including all students in those things can really help get them connected to the rest of their class. And school and classroom environments in language acquisition. So supportive environments reduce affective filters and enhance language acquisition. So they can encourage peer collaboration, promote the use of their first language, which is really important as well. Use visuals, gestures, and scaffolding to help build their language acquisition. And all of these things can happen within the classroom if it's a super inclusive classroom where they can feel welcome to express themselves. So responsiveness to English learner students, strengths and needs. So their needs and strengths need to be figured out right away. so that they can have so that there can be a culturally responsive assessments, and so that we know what they're working with and where they come from, and it's how their view works, right? And it also makes collaboration between general ESL and special education staff really, really, really important, because they may have knowledge that you don't, or previous knowledge of this culture or a different culture that may tie in. So being responsive to their strengths and needs is very, very important, and you need to figure out what those are as soon as possible. Which is why understanding the needs when establishing classroom routines, so incorporating cultural practices into routines fosters trust and consistency with the teacher, and this increases the students' confidence and participation when they feel welcome. Which leads us to the funds of knowledge. So funds of knowledge are culturally rooted skills and experiences students bring from home. And teachers can incorporate family traditions and practices into lessons and use these funds of knowledge to make introduction more relevant and meaningful to the student and the family. And it helps, again, make the classroom super cohesive. So leveraging home language and cultural assets, students' home language are valuable tools, like allowing translanguaging using bilingual aids and culturally familiar materials, inviting families to share stories and songs from their heritage can be really, really useful when teaching the student. And family and community school partnerships. This is very, very important for the student to feel included. Hosting family nights, providing translated materials, conducting home visits are all great tools. And effective family engagement practices like sharing learning strategies in home languages, using multilingual apps to communicate can be really, really helpful. And creating a welcome environment where families feel heard and valued is so important. And that brings us to our last thing. Inclusive community engagement practices partner with local cultural organizations, involve families in school decisions, host events that celebrate cultural heritage to create that wonderful, wonderful classroom. All right, thank you for listening.